Do you feel like the way you sell lacks power? Well, with this book, I'm going to show you the principles of gap selling so that you can find out what kind of problems your prospects have and where they would like to go, so that you can go straight to the issue so that your prospect sees that we're experts and wants to buy our product. So right now, whenever you have a consultation with a prospect, you're probably trying to build some rapport, telling him all about yourself and trying to find some silly jokes, or you might ask some silly superficial information about his business, and then you go all about trying to convince him about how amazing your product really is, hoping that somehow he will buy. So the first step to improve this will be to think about problem, impact, and root cause. So problem, impact, root cause is discussed in the book for two reasons. The first is to do actually research before you do any consultation with your prospects or before you do even any prospecting itself, because you need to first understand your markets. You need to understand what problems are they really dealing with, what impacts are those problems having on their business and on their personal lives, and then also you need to understand what are the root causes of those problems and like what's really causing that. Like if you don't know those things, then you're never going to be able to convince your markets or your prospects that you understand what they're dealing with and that you have something for them. Because if you don't even understand them, then, well, how are you going to have something that benefits their lives? So make sure that you do this research before you even do any selling. Or if you're already doing selling, then take some time off to actually think about your strategy so that you can understand your market better. The second reason why we're thinking about problem, impact, root cause is because it's important in our discovery stage. If you've never heard of that before, it's basically a stage in your sales consultation where you're figuring out all about the prospects and the problems he have. This is usually the beginning of the sales consultation, so it's important that there's some kind of structure to that. And basically in this discovery, one of the most important things we will discuss is what problems do they have? What kind of problems are they dealing with? What are the impacts of those problems? So maybe they're struggling with marketing and the impact of their problems is that, they haven't been able to grow their business in the last year. And then the root cause of those problems is like, well, what's actually the real reason why all of this is happening? And then it might be like, well, they don't really know anything about marketing, or they're scared they might not have any ambition to grow, or like they're scared that it will be too difficult. So you need to go over all of these things in your discovery process as well. Once you understand the problem, impact, root cause, and you also understand how to structure your discovery process, the next thing before you ask any of those questions will be to know that it's important that you have to allow your prospects to open up. You need to create some kind of rapport with him for him to be able to trust you and sees that basically you care about him and that you're there to help him. If you don't do that, then, well, your prospect won't feel safe and he will never go into that. Now, the issue with this is that most people think that in order to build rapport, they have to be like the fun guy that makes kind of jokes and tries to tell them all about themselves and tries to go into like meeting or like asking like too much questions about, where they are at, or like making like too much small talk. But that's not going to be perceived well. Like even if you were good at like socializing in that way, it's still not going to be a benefit because, well, it might be a small benefit, but it's still not the right way to conduct your discovery process, because he doesn't care. Your prospect doesn't care. Your prospect is there to solve a problem and is there to do business. So I do think it's good to talk a little bit about yourself, but don't like keep this like really short and then go straight into the reason why he's there. Now, the way you actually build rapport is by showing that you're an expert, that you're professional, and that your solution will actually work, and also that you care about his problems. So it's more about the way you speak and the kind of questions that you ask, rather than like trying to be very charismatic, actually. So the last thing I would add is that it's also important to have the right mindset to be an ethical seller, because if you do have that mindset, then obviously, the client is going to know that you're ethical and you actually care about the people you're trying to help, and will trust you more, which is super important. So once we have our prospect opened up a little bit by explaining why is there, and then by going into discovery by asking small questions, small comfortable questions at first, and not trying to provoke right away. So in the discovery, it will be important that we figure out the current states and the future state. So the current state is where he is currently, and the future state is obviously where he would like to be. So in order to do that, in order to find out the current state, it will be important that we probe or prospect about his current situation. So in the book, Keenan says to be very careful about the way you ask questions, because you don't want to be interrogative. You don't want to seem like provocative. And for that cause, he actually recommends us to use command-based statements, which is basically questions phrased as a statement and in a less intrusive way. So instead of like asking like some really specific question, he would ask like, well, hey, John, can you tell me a little bit about your business right now? That gives John more of a sense of control, so that he can then say whatever on his mind. And we can then dig deeper if there's like something we think is interesting or something we want to know, but we always give John a sense of control. Then obviously, as we go and our prospect trusts us a little bit more, we go deeper into more important questions. And for figuring out the current state, it's first important to gather all the information we need. Then we really try to figure out the problems. And this is really, really important. We need to figure out where they are and what, not just information about the business, but we need to get them to admit that they're actually having some problem. If they don't do that, then, you're not going to win the sale, because then there's nothing you can really help him with, or he's not convinced at least that you can, because he doesn't want to admit any of his problems. So it's really important to really kind of hunt for those problems. Of course, you need to do that in a way that John feels good about it, but you still need to get to the root of the issue. And then once we do that, we need to get to their why, like what's really their motivation? Why do they really want to change their situation? And once we have that, then we go into the future state and see like where they would really like to be. And for that, it's important not just to ask them questions where they would like to be, but also if you're selling something, you probably have some desired state that you want them to get to. So then you also bring in like your perspective, and then you ask them like, hey, if you could get to this place, would this be interesting for you? So you kind of mix the questions sort of like on his side for what they want to achieve, but you also ask them questions because you want to get them to somewhere, probably with your service or product, so that you have an input on that as well. So with that, we have our discovery, we have our current states and our future states. So that's basically how you do the discovery. So right now, you're in a pretty good situation with your sales consultation. Your prospect, you know that your prospect has a problem. You know that they agree that they have a problem. You know that they want to fix the problem. And you know that they trust you and they see you as an expert. However, you need to be careful that you do these things in the right way. Because if you don't do this with the right intent and the right execution, the right tonality, the right body language, and you don't fully understand the questions you're asking, your prospect is going to have some questions, and you're going to have difficulty to transition to the pitch and the close. So in order to make sure that we don't waste our effort until now, we're going to have to think about a few more pointers. The first will be that when you're finding out the problems that your customer have, it will be really important to challenge your prospects and to even provoke them. Because if they don't say that they have any problems, or if they don't admit that they have any problems, then you're never going to be able to help them. And understand that it's not just about you being able to sell them something. It's also, it's for a big part, it's also about actually you helping them to improve a part of their life. So if you don't do that, if you don't ask these questions that might be a little bit uncomfortable to ask, your prospect is never going to admit that, and they might never even get help, and their situation might never improve. So it's also about you being selfless enough to ask the questions that are difficult to ask, that really allow your prospects to move forward, and to really, and not just to have them admit them, but to also have them think about that, because if they need to understand their situation as well. So the next point will be to know their why. And once they know when they really have a problem, or they have some problems that they want to fix, we now need to get them to say why they want to fix it. Because if they don't, they might understand that they have a problem, but if we don't understand their motivation, if they might just say, well, we have a problem, and they might think, well, we might just put it off until later and we'll see what we can do with it. But if you understand their why, if you ask them, well, why is this important for you to fix? Why don't you just double down on your current strategy right now? If you ask these type of why questions, you'll really try to see like what kind of your prospect is dealing with and how you can really motivate him to solve that problem. The next pointer will be to highlight the gap. So it's gap selling. So the first state is the current state, and the future state is the next state. And between that is the gap. And the gap is what you're selling, because that's what your product does. So in order for your prospect to realize that, you're going to have to really stress and highlight that fact that your service is going to bring him from his current state to his future state. And obviously make sure that your product or service actually does that. But if you don't highlight that, if you don't bring that to his attention, then he's never going to understand the full measure of your product. So be sure to stress and highlight that gap. The next thing will be to connect your solution to that gap. So make sure that you don't just highlight that gap, but you also explain to them, well, this is actually what our service and our product is going to do, because we have this feature, or because we have these testimonials that we've done for clients in the past. Really try to explain to your prospects why your product will fulfill on that gap. That will be really, really important. So once you know all of these things and you've mastered all of these things, you've mastered gap selling and you've mastered your discovery process, then you will see your closes will start becoming much easier. Your prospects will see you as an actual expert, because you're not just highlighting some random features about your product. No, you've actually dived into their core issues. You've probably helped them understand some things, challenges that they didn't even know they were dealing with. And you've really helped them see that, there's another way, there's a way forward. And once you master this, you will see that not only will you sell a lot more, but you'll also have a lot more satisfied customers. And you'll start thinking like a real entrepreneur. Be sure to check out my next video if you like this one or you learned something, where you will tell you all about Jordan Belfort's new book, The Way of the Wolf, where he goes really in depth about the struggles salespeople have these days, especially when it comes to closing.